It's that time of year again, and tonight is our highly requested, highly coveted auction strategy podcast. We'll talk all things auction, from how to construct a plan, how to manage money, how to nominate, how to bid, and everything in between. Tonight also marks our very special 200th episode of the Beat the Shift podcast, and we are so fortunate that all of you have supported listening to the show over the past few years. Thank you, and hope you enjoy our latest episode. The Beat the Shift Auction Bonanza is next. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. What's up, Ruvain?
Not much. How are you doing today?
Well, I can't shake this hoarse voice, as you guys might hear. I'm still raspy, getting a little bit better. I feel good, but can't stop talking about baseball. And tonight is our 200th episode. Oh my God, Ruvain, we've made it to 200.
Yeah, the first 199 went pretty fast, I guess. And, we're having fun doing this. Hopefully we're able to teach people a couple things, learn some stuff ourselves, and have fun doing it.
And to honor our 200th episode, we are going to do our most popular podcast, our auction strategy episode. We're dedicating this to strategy. We might mention a player or two here and there, but the focus is on how to play auctions, how to win, how to nominate, how to keep track, plans, everything, you name it. And to help us with it, we've got a fantastic auction player, our buddy from the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast, Frank Stampfl. Welcome to the show.
Ariel, what's going on, man? I appreciate you guys having me on. It's an honor. It's a privilege to be here on your 200th episode. Congrats to you guys. That is a great accomplishment. I just want to make sure before we get started that Ruvain did not harm any children or knock any kids over while getting to his microphone tonight.
No, everyone is safe. I may have tripped over a cat, but otherwise everything is fine.
Frank is saying that because 2 years ago or 3 years ago at First Pitch Arizona, we went to the home run derby and Ruvain caught a ball, but he did that while knocking over about 3 kids.
Yeah, I probably should have added that. I probably should have added that context, right? Not just get right into it and say, oh, Ruvain's knocking over kids or anything. Yes, it was at a home run derby. We were giving him crap. He didn't actually do that, but it's still a funny story that we like to tell.
Although I almost did it again this year. I was like leaning over the it was like a pole, and I was leaning over just a little bit, almost, but almost doesn't count.
It wasn't you who did it this year. It was me. I knocked over some kids to get the ball.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
There were 2 people who actually got a ball this year from our group, and one of them was Frank, and the other was anybody?
Was it you, Ariel?
Yes, it was
there
me.
You go.
I was going to say that Ruvain didn't knock over anybody because this year they actually put a kids-only section and they roped off the front so that people like Ruvain wouldn't knock over everybody.
And we won't talk about the ball that Frank dropped that landed in his glove, basically.
Oh, God. You know what? Honestly, for me calling you out, Ruvain, I 1,000% deserve that. I mean, that is one of my most embarrassing moments that I've ever had in front of everybody. Of course, I got the ball that bounced to me, but the one on the fly right to me. Granted, I played center field in high school. I mean, what an embarrassment. How did I do that?
Well, anyways, we brought Frank on the show here, and Frank is a fantastic auction player. I remember that you won back-to-back auctions when we did the Tout Wars head-to-head, and it was really tough drafting against you, and then you left the league, and I'm like, all right, I don't got to deal with Frank anymore in the league. And then I won this year.
I figured I would give you a chance, Ariel.
Thank you very much for exiting, but always fun to play with you as well. But anyways, let's get right into it. And let's start out really basic. But Frank, what is your general auction strategy and what are your main rules that you live by?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's more of a mantra than a strategy. And I'll get into some of the strategy things, but being disciplined while also being flexible, I think is my main mantra that I want to focus on in auctions. In previous years, I think I've been more rigid, try to plan out who I wanted at every position. I would have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, usually similar price point, similar skill set for each of those targets that I wanted to get. for the most part, I would stay disciplined and follow that to a T. But I noticed there were times where if I couldn't get a specific player that I planned for, it would kind of cause me to tilt a little bit throughout the auction. And you really want to minimize that as much as possible, just because there are so many other different things that are going on and players are getting nominated. You got to be able to just shake it off and keep moving. So in order to try and move past that, I mean, this year I'm looking to change things up a little bit more, be more flexible. In previous years, I would find myself saying, wow, that person just got a great discount on that player. I should have been in. Why didn't I do that? Because it didn't fit my quote unquote plan. So instead, what I'm planning to do now is just to have targets at each position, but not be as rigid with specific players and price points, right? I want to have a plan for a high-end player, a mid-tier player, a low-end player that I like at each position, and not just one player. I mean, it could be groups of players that are high-end, mid-tier, low-end players, and if they're going for a value, I could jump in. It allows me to be a little bit more flexible, where in years past, I've just been so rigid with things. And look, with that said, I still want to make sure that I get high-level talent, because I don't just want a team of pure values, right? I mean, I think if you do that, you kind of fall into the danger of, all right, I got values everywhere, but next thing you know, I have 23 players that are all mid-tier players, right? All guys going in rounds 5 through 12. So what I'm thinking now is that I do kind of want to go with this big three approach, where I get one first-round hitter and being more open to who that hitter is, but just trying to get 5 category production from one first-round type hitter, get an ace-type pitcher, build out that base of elite ratios, big innings, lots of strikeouts, obviously, and then also getting one lockdown closer where, I could build that base of saves, obviously good ratios, good strikeouts, and someone that you feel good about is going to hold on to the role. And again, being flexible with the players that I'm actually getting, but trying to hit those big three. One big hitter, one big pitcher, one big closer, and then kind of being a lot more flexible throughout the rest of the positions.
All right, Ruvain, some of your general strategy and your rules that you live by.
Well, pretty similar to Frank in a sense that I'm looking for values all the time, except at the top. At the top, you want to be able to spend a little bit more, because otherwise you're not going to get those guys, because the top players are always a little bit overvalued. You're never going to get anybody, but you have to try to avoid paying the top dollar. If you can find the price point where you're not paying the top dollar, but you're still able to get the top guy on your list, then that's great. But you also have to let the auction come to you. The auction table is just like a poker table. You have to have a poker face. You have to be able to understand that everyone else is going for the same players that you are. Everyone is able to get the same players as you are, which is different than in a snake draft. You can, quote unquote, be on every hand. You can see the flop. You can see how high the price goes, but you can always bow out anytime you want. Now, at the same point, you have to manage your money. You have to make sure you know what you're doing, meaning you don't want to spend all your money and go stars and scrubs. If you don't want to do stars and scrubs, you have to try to stick to your strategy as much as possible. But I think the main thing is value early and often, and let the auction come to you.
All right, I mean, my general strategy is I want to acquire $310 of value for the $260 of auction dollars that I get. I don't want to just buy players at what my projections say. If my projections say it's a $15 player and I buy him at $15 and I buy a $10 player at $10 and so on and so forth, well, I'm going to have an average team because I'm buying $260 of value for $260. I want to buy $310 for $260, and to do that, most of your players have to be bought at a bargain. My rules that I live by are, number one, auctions are zero-sum games. If a player goes for $5 over your value, there's going to be another player who's going to be $5 under your value. That's just the way math works. We're going to talk a little bit about auction temperature, but you want to buy all of your players either in a cold section of the draft, that's where players are going under value, or you want to buy them in a hot section by paying a smaller relative value than anybody else. If players are going $7 over your value and you're buying a player at $3 over yours, that's fine. Yes, it's $3 over your value, but it's not $7. And so it's a relative bargain. My other rules, nominations matter. They do. And, of course, have fun. If you ain't having fun, then you ain't going to be doing well. Frank, what is your preparation that you do for an auction?
So I swear I'm not just saying this because it's your podcast, Ariel, but I do start with ATC projections.
Hey.
Using the auction calculator on Fangraphs. That's just kind of the base that I start with evaluations. And then what I like to do in specific auctions that I've played in previously, you can't do this, if you're just joining an NFBC auction that you've never played in before. But if you play in a home league or you play, for us, we play in industry leagues where we've played against a lot of the same players in the past, is look at previous auction results to get a feel of how much players went for. For example, in NL Labor and Tout Wars, it's typically all of the same competitors. So I'll look back to see if there were inflation on certain players, if there were inflation on first-round players or specific positions or categories to kind of help build on the ATC values. And, it's not the end-all, be-all because, obviously, projections, it's a median outcome and median expectation for a player. There are players that I'm just inherently going to be higher on or lower on, so I'll tweak some of the auction values to what I think a player should be worth and just kind of have that mental model, I guess, of, having the projections, but kind of building off from there.
Yeah, I do something similar. I start, again, with ATC projections. I will tweak some things about a player's projection if I believe that he'll get more at-bats, less at-bats. I generally don't change rate stats because I let projections do that, but I'll tweak some at-bats and get a little bit of a different value. I'll then assemble market values, as you said, getting past results, seeing where players are going for. I'll then compare my values versus the market to see where bargains are. I'll see where there's small bargains, where there's medium bargains, where there's big bargains, and I'll sort of create a plan to say, I think that there are a lot of bargains, $5 middle infielders. And so I know that that's a section where I probably will buy a middle infielder at $5. I'll write in MI, 5. Where's their first baseman? Well, looks like there's 4 first basemen that are going about $20. I'll pencil in 20, and I'll write a couple of names down that I think I can fit my team. And I'll put together what I think is a reasonable possibility of what I can get at an auction with bargains, and I'll fit it together. It doesn't always go like that. Sometimes you have to make adjustments and then knock prices down of your plan and prop them up and so on and so forth. But that's the plan that you want to start with, and you want to be prepared. Of course, there's deep dives into players, whether you like somebody or not, whether you think that it's real, the projection. All that goes, in draft prep, in snake draft prep, auction prep, of course. But I'm just talking right now about what the actual auction prep is. Ruvain?
Yeah, mine's like almost a combination of both of what you guys said. First of all, you go by the projections. You see where you want to dive into, where you're willing to test the waters. But I also keep with me at all times during this type of draft a depth chart for the starters and the closers. I need to know toward the end because the auction is pretty slow in the very beginning because the prices go pretty high, but toward the end of the auction, you're going to start going a lot quicker, and you have to be ready with these guys. You should also understand a little bit about the AAV and where you can actually try to sneak some players in because you want to be able to get the best value possible, and you don't want guys going too cheap if you have them rated higher and you see the AAV is lower. You don't want to make sure that someone else gets a good bargain that you can lose out on. You can also check the competition, like Frank said. You can check who you're playing against, if they have any tendencies or anything like that. And I think going in, yes, I have to have multiple plans ready just in case you have to pivot because each auction room is different.
Frank, what are the 3 most important things to keep track of during an auction?
So I think first and foremost, keeping track of your own money is the most important thing. You need to know how much money you have left, I think, throughout all points of the auction, and especially for later on, what your max bid is, because it's just so important to know whether or not, you can get to a certain point on a player and when you might need to stop and dial things back. You don't want to leave yourself with just a bunch of $1 players at the end of the draft. So I think first and foremost, just tracking your own money is probably the most important thing. Next, I think you want to keep track of how much players are going for and how that compares to the valuation that you have for said players. So if you have first-round players, for example, valued between $35 and $45 each, but all of them are going for $2 to $3 more than they're supposed to. That's going to tell you that, okay, there's some inflation on the higher-end players, and if you want to get those guys, you can, but you might have to go a few dollars more just to keep up with said inflation. But like you said earlier, Ariel, that means that there's going to be values at some point later on in the draft. Again, there's just a finite amount of money. That's the way that the math works out within an auction. Everybody has their $260 that they could spend. So if there are a bunch of players that are going for $2 to $3 more, you know that there's going to be $2 to $3 savings at some point. At what point will that be? you won't know until it's happening. It could be, $12 players are going for 10. It could be $5 players are going for 3, so on and so forth. So I like to keep track of how much players are going for as well and how much higher or lower they're going for compared to my valuation. And last, I like to pay attention to how much money other people have. I realize that it's hard, man. There are a lot of different things that are going on within the auction. I mean, I would try to minimize it as much as possible, whether you're doing this on a spreadsheet or just kind of, old school pen and paper, whatever that might be, but paying attention to how much money other people have, especially later on in the auction, and knowing what their max bid is, because if someone has a max bid of, $5 or $10, that you can go to that point and the other person that you're bidding against can't go any further. So for me, the big three, I'm looking at my own money, I'm looking at other people's money, and I'm looking for how much players are going for within the auction.
Yeah, let me just add on to some of those concepts, which are all fantastic. Looking at other people's money, to me, it's about purchasing power. If you're having the most money of anybody, the problem is that you're going to have to spend money soon. You're going to be overinflated. Like, you'll have too much money to spend on not enough resources. And you'll end up saying, oh, there's only so many good players left. They're not worth it, but what am I going to do? I have the money. You don't want to be in that position. You also don't want to be in a position where you have not enough money, where you've spent money and everyone else has more, because then you can't afford to buy players. And there might be some good bargains later on that you say, I just can't afford it. But you want to, because it's a good bargain, it's a good price. So you want to be somewhere in the middle to maximize your purchasing power best you can. Obviously, if there's good prices, you're not going to say no, because I got to be in the middle of the pack, but you have to judge what should you do, what shouldn't you do, and pace yourself to be in it. As far as bargains at the top and paying over at the top and bargains at the end, remember, if players are going $3, $4 over at the top, if you just avoid that totally, then at the end, sure, you'll get all your players for $3 or $4 bargains, but A, everyone else will as well, and then they're going to make up all the money they lost earlier. But B, you're not going to have spent enough value, right? You have to spend $260 until the bargains come. We're talking $5, $10 players. So you need to be somewhere in that $20, $30 range. Get somebody at, again, you don't have to spend $10 over your values. You can spend $3, but if you don't go over your values at all, you're going to have a money problem. Ruvain, what are your things that you want to keep track of?
Well, you guys already mentioned the money part, so I'm going to add on 2 quick things. The first one is you want to keep track of the big board. You have to see what other teams are looking for, where they have openings, because if you have an opening in the same area where another team has, and you're going to be bidding against the same players because you have the similar budget, you have to be aware of that and plan ahead and know exactly what you're going to get into. The other thing is, you mentioned about keeping track of other people's money. You want to, most times you want to have the hammer, and you don't want to have too much money either, because like you said, Ariel, you're gonna see that you're gonna overpay for people when you don't have to. And also during the draft, what I do is I look for inflation areas, meaning there are areas where certain stats or certain players, like closers or people who are stolen bases, seem to be more inflated in certain drafts than others. It's not going to be, like I mentioned before, every auction is different, and every draft is different. But sometimes closers will be hot, and you see, okay, you know what? They're all going for $3 over. You're going to have to pay that premium, otherwise you're going to lose out. You can wait, but you're not going to get the players that fit your plan. Same thing with stolen bases. If you think stolen bases are going hot, and you feel like you need to get stolen bases somewhere, then make sure your whole plan changes. Make sure you allocate money, move your money around, so you know exactly where you can fit that piece of the puzzle for the rest of the auction.
Yeah, you got to make sure that you know where the stats are getting scarce, where the positions are getting scarce. And I'll add one more thing to keep track of is you need to know who you're going to nominate next. At all times, who's my next nomination? That's more important than you think. Talk a little bit about scouting. Frank, I know that when I played Tout Wars head-to-head, I had to pay attention to what you were doing because you were playing in a lot of the same spaces that I was. When I should say Paul Sporer was in Tout Wars, I really didn't pay attention at all to what he was doing because he was not playing in any of the places I was. He was playing up top, low. He was not interested in the same players as me. Frankly, I really didn't care what he did. And it's not a mock to Paul. It's just if he's not in the same space as me, it doesn't matter. But it mattered where you were because I know we'd be fighting over the same players very often, so I had to pay attention. I know that scouting is important because, like, for example, Clay Link is in head-to-head. He's always going to buy Vladimir Guerrero. If you know that, you know not to make him part of your plan, and you also know to bid him up. If you're playing against Jeff Zimmerman, you know that he's going to go hard after Ohtani, and then he's going to toss out for his nomination every single utility player that you want. So if you're interested in a utility player like Yelich, he's coming out in the second round, and you know Jeff Zimmerman is going to throw him out. So I very, very much want to know how everyone else plays to know what I'm going to do. Do you actually look at what other players going to do, or are you sort of, just ride with the punches and whatever it is?
Yeah, I'm always trying to learn and see what other people are doing. And I think it can give you a bit of a leg up on the competition. Now, it's not always something that you can know. It might be unknowable because, if you're joining an NFBC auction against people you've never played against, there's just no way for you to know. But if it's a home league against people that you've played against before, you'll pick up on tendencies. This person likes to do stars and scrubs. This person is a Yankees fan, right? Something I always think about in NL Labor is Eric Carabel. He's a Phillies fan, and it feels like he always winds up with Phillies players, right? So that's something that I'll know where, hey, if there are some Phillies players that I know I don't want that might be a little bit overvalued in my opinion, I might throw those guys off throw them out just to kind of get money off the board and make someone specific spend money. I have great respect for Brett Sayer, man. I mean, he does stars and scrubs in basically every league that I've played against with him. And we play in NL Labor together. We play in Tout Wars together, which is a 15-team mixed roto auction. And typically in those deeper formats, it's not advisable to go stars and scrubs, but he just executes it to a T. And I think part of that is like knowing the type of player that you are and whether or not you can actually pull that off. I mean, you have to know the player pool inside and out. You have to know, $1 to $5 players that you really like and guys that you think maybe could take a step up to be able to pull something like that off. But I'm always trying to learn. I'm always looking back at what, previous winners have done and the players that they bid on and the strategy that they use. I like to look at the hitter-pitcher split that previous winners have done before to see, all right, what are these guys doing? How are they successful? Is there a way that I can work this into my strategy where I can be successful doing that? So yeah, I always look back at what other people have done and other little tendencies you just pick up the more that you play against the same players over and over again.
You remember a couple of years ago when I filled in for Ian Kahn at NL Labor and Carabel was in the draft and Whit Merrifield signed with the Phillies and I kept bidding on him 8, 9, 10 and I just stared at Carabel and I knew he was going to bid and I didn't even want Merrifield, but I stared at him. I'm like 10. And I'm like, dare you to go 11. And he did. Yeah. And I'm like, there you go. Because I knew that he was going to bid him.
Yeah, and that could be an advantage, right? And it's not just, to, single out Eric Carabel. I mean, there are fans of teams everywhere, right? I mean, I'm a Yankees fan. If we play in a mixed league together, you want to throw Aaron Judge out there and, try and test me and see how much I love Aaron Judge, go for it. I mean, all the more information you have, it could be beneficial for you. Now, I don't think that you need to go over the top and try and, figure out every team, every player's fandom. But if it's knowable and it's something that you could take advantage of, yeah, why not?
Ryan Hallam walks into the labor draft with a St. Louis Cardinal Paul Goldschmidt jersey. I mean, he walked out with him on his roster, so, you bid him up on that one.
Yeah, but you also have to watch for other things like who they're nominating. A lot of people who, when they nominate someone, they're going after them. A lot of people when they nominate just want to get money off the board.
Yes.
You could tell a ton about that. Like me when me and Ariel played together, we're nominating players that we want, but we're also nominating players that we don't want because you don't want to get a pattern on someone. Because if you get a pattern on somebody, then you'll know, okay, listen, this guy nominated him. He's going after him. I have to beware. Maybe I'll get the price up on him a little bit. Maybe I won't. Maybe as a price point. I'm not sure. And, that's very important. Also, look and see if these other players or teams have one or two players, because having two players on a team is a great advantage as opposed to one, just because you have more eyes on the people, you have more ears listening what's going on, and just that alone, who's using pen and paper, who's using computer, who do you think you can, I mean, I hate to say it, but who do you think you can take advantage of over the fact that if you have a team, if you have two people as opposed to one, that can come into, and that can be a great advantage.
I was going to talk a little bit about online auctions versus in-person auctions. And one thing I'll note is that having a partner in an online auction is so much more helpful than having a partner in an in-person auction. Because when you're in an online auction, you're looking at your screen with your numbers, you're looking at your screen with the plan, you're looking at your screen to actually make a bid. To have a partner take some of that off and do the bidding while you're talking out loud is so much more beneficial. If I'm at an in-person auction, I don't have to bid by pressing my computer button, right? I just yell out a bid. I can do more things at once. So it's a big advantage there. Frank, what about you? How else do you think an online auction differs from an in-person auction?
Look, first and foremost, I think both are incredibly fun. I think the auction is the best way to play fantasy baseball. There is nothing better than an in-person auction. I mean, being in a room together, it just brings a different level of intensity. The bidding wars, it feels like they mean more. There's stare downs. There's the mental aspect of it. Actually, in person, when I am in on a player that I am bidding on, I will just look at the auctioneer. I will not even look at the other person that is bidding against me. I don't want to be affected by it. I don't want, if they're making faces at me or trying to get me to go that extra dollar, I don't even look at them. I just look straight at the auctioneer, and I try to be just, like objective as possible when I'm trying to bid on a player. Like, don't want to be influenced by other things. But I think some things that do change, and again, it's like, that ability to pick up on tells that people are doing in person, right? Where Ruvain mentioned earlier, the poker face. People might not have that poker face. They might get a little fidgety when they're bidding on a player that they really want. And these are little things, right? I'm not going out of my way to try and pick it up. But, if you are bidding against someone else and you're looking at them, you might see like, oh, they look a little bit nervous and things like that. So you can pick up on something like that, I think, in person. Online, still very fun. I think it's very different. The number one thing to me is to be 100% familiar with the software that you're drafting on, right? Because it's going to differ from website to website. And I know, last couple of years we've been doing the labor auctions online, and, there are things that I didn't know about the RT Sports Draft Room. So I had to get in there a little bit earlier and make sure that I knew that inside and out, because the last thing you want is mid-auction is something goes completely wrong and, you're left scrambling trying to figure out what to do next. So I think that first and foremost. Something very interesting about NFBC Auction Draft Room, for example, is the max bid button that you can use. And it can be so beneficial, because if you set your max bid, just for example, Aaron Judge, $50, and you have the $49 bid, someone else goes 50. If you set your max bid to 50, you will automatically get that $50 bid. That is something that can't happen anywhere else. If you're bidding on CBS or in person and someone else goes 50, you can't get that $50 bid. There's no other way. You have to go $51 next if you want to get Aaron Judge. So really knowing that draft software and the things that you can take advantage of online is just so, so important.
Oh, yeah, and it also, it's very big on the NFBC because, like, I don't know, for example, we put up a Josh Naylor. If you're putting up somebody for bid, you put them up with a max bid, and you say, okay, I want Josh Naylor. Obviously, I want him as cheap as possible, but I want him, but I'm not going to go over $18. And if you do that and set the 18, it'll just keep bidding until 18. If it goes to 17, you win him at 17. If it goes to 16, you win him. If it goes to 18, you win him. But if it goes to 19, then you're out. And it automatically does it for you. It's very unique, and you do have to know it. And if you're playing against Zach Waxman, oh boy, that guy has the fastest fingers. He will get his max bid in before you. He's crazy good at it.
And also, you have to watch out also for online that accidental overbid. You can't do that in a live auction. Oops, I accidentally pressed the button. No, it doesn't work in a live auction. You actually have to yell out, which is a big thing, because if you accidentally buy somebody for a price that you don't want, it could screw up your whole auction.
That is a fantastic point, Ruvain, because I think a lot of people, the way that they do auctions online is they just press the +1 button. And if somebody jump bids out of nowhere and you're stuck pressing the +1 button, guess what? You have that bid. So you really, I think the way to do it is either if you play on an NFBC, you could do the max bid function, or if you play anywhere else, just manually put in your bids, because if you're hitting +1 and someone does a jump bid, because jump bids are they're pretty regular. They're used all the time. Someone jumps a first-round player from, the bidding is slow, 20, 21, 22. Boom, someone jumps all the way up to $35. You press +1, and you don't want that guy for 36. You really just have to be sure you're paying attention. So I would say if you can manually input your bids, input the numbers on your bid, do that instead of doing the +1 button.
My next question to you, Frank, is how do you construct market values, meaning like ADPs or AAVs? Where do you get those sources from? And also, number two, how recent are you looking to compile them from? Because some sites actually let you set a date range of, oh, it's the ADP from this date to this date.
Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier again, like I start with the ATC projections. I like to look at previous year's results and spending tendencies. Again, if every year I play in the same league, I'll know, usually the room is hot for saves or hot for steals or hot for first round players or first round hitters, first round pitchers, whatever it might be, to just get that in the back of my mind that it's a likely thing to happen once again. Doesn't mean that it definitely will happen once again, but I just want to mentally prepare myself for that. So as much information as you can gain to form your market value, I think is beneficial to you. And you mentioned using, date ranges and AAV. I mean, this is where the NFBC ADP data or their AAV data just stands out above the rest, because you can put it by a certain date. You could set it from a certain date on, and you can kind of track the trends and which players are moving up and down. And that is just so beneficial to know, which players are gaining helium or maybe which players are falling down the board. The problem, I think, with that is a lot of the auctions, I think all the auctions on NFBC are 15-team leagues. So the AAVs for those, if you play in a 12-team league at home, it's not going to be the same. So it doesn't necessarily translate exactly the same way, but you can use that date range to see which players are moving up, which players are moving down, and I think it's something that you should be looking to do.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you want to look at the ADP or AAV data for as similar a type of league that you play. NFBC is very robust in their data, but obviously it applies just to their data, so you have to either convert or whatever. To me, in terms of how recent you want to look at it, I think that it's an old actuarial problem. Do you want a bigger sample size, or do you want a more homogeneous and more recent thing? Yeah, to be honest, ideally you want all the ADP data from yesterday only, if there were so many drafts, right? I think that for auctions, I generally want something like 7 to 12 auctions, and for drafts, I want at least 20 to 30 drafts. So I'm looking, for auctions, I'm looking in the last month. I'm looking for drafts also in about the last month or so. As we get into March, when there's a lot of main events that happen over a weekend, I'll literally look at just the ADP from a certain weekend. To add to that, if you can pull individual draft data, for some players who have recent injury news or recent news, something like, Corbin Carroll, we didn't know about before, but now we know he's a little bit injured. Lindor, we didn't know about, but he's injured. I tend to want to look only at ADP data from after the point of injury, or after the point of the news, more specifically, because that'll give you a better idea of where he's going to be drafted going forward. If you're using a whole month of ADP data, it's going to look like Corbin Carroll is taken much earlier. Take a guy like Spencer Schwellenbach. I mean, you look at his ADP data, it looks like everybody wants him. But, if you look at only the last week, well, nobody wants him. So you want to fine-tune that for him specifically as much as you can. And the last thing I'll point out, which is a plea for the NFBC, is that better than AAVs are actually MAVs, median auction values, because you can have an auction where at the end of the draft, somebody has got too much money and just spends $20 on a $4 player. That messes up the average, but it does not mess up the median. So MAVs are slightly superior. Now, to be honest, they're going to be very close to AAVs, so it doesn't matter. But specifically, I think it is a slight improvement. So NFBC, could you please post median auction values?
That was my next question, Ariel, is how do you find those?
It would be good if the NFBC posted it, but what you need to do if you want to actually calculate it is download individual draft data and then compile them yourself. Here's the 10 drafts, and then take a median function yourself. It's a lot more work to do that, which is why I'd like the NFBC to actually post it.
And what I would add on to this is that you want to know that you asked about the time frame. If you're drafting, let's say the beginning of February before pitchers and catchers report, you want the data from the end of last year because everything's going to be the same. I mean, some players change teams, so their helium may go up and go down. But you have a basic idea because not many people are drafting in December. Some in January, but from February, once pitchers and catchers report, I think you want it like every like a 2-3 week range. I don't think you want anything more than that because once people start coming to camp, oh, I had this injury. Oh, I had surgery in the off season. Oh, this person. Oh, they're going to start in the minors now. Like I'm talking about Jason Dominguez, he's going to start in the minors. You don't know this stuff, and people who drafted, let's say in the beginning or mid of January, and now you're drafting in February, you're going to get those numbers, and those numbers are actually going to skew what they actually should be.
So I want to talk a little bit about strike prices. Now, Frank, since you use ATC projections, you're running an auction calculator on Fangraphs, which is really the best way to do it, or if you have your own auction calculator, but Fangraphs is a pretty decent one. And so, you might be tweaking a little bit if you think a player is a little bit better. So if they come out with an $8 value, you might say, you know what, I think he's a $10 value. Or if you don't think it's right, maybe it goes to $6, right? You're all entitled to make your own tweaks. But there's a difference between what you think a player's value is worth and what you're willing to pay for him, which is called a strike price. If a player is worth $40 according to the auction calculator, you might be willing to go to $44 for him. That's your strike price. If a player is worth $10, though, you're not going to want to go to $10. You might want to only go to $5 to realize a $5 bargain. So my question to you is, how do you construct strike prices based on people's values? How do you then determine what price you're going to pay for them?
Yeah, so I think it depends on the tier of player, kind of like you just laid out, basically, where the higher end the player, and it goes back to adjusting to your specific auction, where if everyone else is paying, $2 to $3 over value for an elite talent, and you don't want to be left behind, and you want to get that 5-category stud, whoever it might be, you realize you're probably going to have to go $2 to $3 over value. And as good as auction values are, and the projection, the auction calculator on Fangraphs, it's not exactly how things are going to go. We just know that, right? So I think adjusting within the draft and knowing, hey, if I have to go a couple dollars, like I don't have strike prices in my mind before the draft, Ariel. I kind of adjust on the fly and realize, hey, if I got to go a couple more dollars to get this player that I really want, more so a high-end player, then I'm going to be willing to do that. I think as you go further into the auction for the mid to lower-end players, like, yeah, you do want to pick up as much value as much as you possibly can. And that goes back to what I said at the top with me kind of changing the way I play a little bit and being a little bit more flexible with the players that I want to get and not just saying, hey, I've got to get one of these 3 second basemen. There's nobody else that I can get. If there's a second baseman that I kind of like and he's going for $5 less than what I have him written down for, like, yeah, I'm going to get in on the bidding and try and get as many values as I possibly can. But I kind of look at it like a sliding scale, kind of the way you set up this question, Ariel, where on the high end, I'll be willing to spend a few dollars extra to get that player that I really want. And then in the mid to lower end of the auction and those players, I'm really just looking to pick up as many values as I can.
Yeah, so you're basically using a pricing curve, not a specific thing for each player.
Yep.
You're using a curve.
Yep.
Right. Ruven?
Well, I think there should be a strike price going in, but once the auction starts and you see how hot or how cold the room is, I think you have to be a little bit flexible because when you go into the draft and auction, you have to have a plan of which top guys you want to get, which bottom guys you want to get, just an idea. You don't have to have specific players, but I have an idea. So you should have that strike price for the top players. Like let's say just like Frank said, you want to go $1 or $2 or $3 over. But if you see they're going $4 or $5 over, do you really want to do that? Do you think that you're going to change your strike price just because there's increased inflation in the room, or do you pivot? And that's where it comes down to how you can construct your team and where you have extra money to move around. If you're flexible in the rest of your construct of how you're going into the draft and how you want to build a team, then your strike price can vary once the draft starts.
Yeah, it's definitely going to change as it goes on. I mean, I start out like Frank. I have just a general curve that I'm going to use. But, if I see that speed is really going very, very tight in drafts, that, oh my goodness, people are paying for speed, well, my strike prices for speed somewhere in the middle of the draft is going to be higher. I'm willing to go the extra dollar to secure the speed and so on and so forth. If I see that corner infielders are cheap, well, my strike prices are now going to actually lower because if everybody's going for a dollar bargain, well, I want to have a $4 bargain, right? So it also depends. If I get a bunch of bargains earlier, I might be inclined to say, okay, well, now I've got the money to get a mid-tier guy where I didn't think I would. My strike price can go up. So I think it really depends on the dynamics of this particular auction you're in, but do come in with a general curve that you know, okay, at the top, pay $1.02 over. Okay, in the middle, pay $1.02 under. Oh, at the bottom, it's got to be $5 bargain. You gotta have to have that kind of curve in mind. Frank, how strict are you to your own pricing? So, for example, Larry Schechter, if he sees a guy is worth $10, he ain't going more than $9.90. He won't go anywhere over. And, you know, he's extremely rigid. The question is, how rigid are you? And more specifically, what would make you change your opinion during draft to being strict with your evaluation of players?
So typically in the past, I have been extremely strict on, you know, what I want to pay for a player and trying to pick up values wherever I can. And I think this is where I got in trouble in previous drafts where, again, if I would have a specific player in mind that I want to get, I would say, all right, I want to get this player no matter what. And then next thing you know, $3, $4, $5 over a player. And then, all right, I'm out, but now I have to figure out on the fly, where am I going to allocate those funds? So that's why I'm trying to be a little bit more flexible this year. But it's flexible in terms of the players that I'm getting. I still do want to be very strict in how much I am spending. And again, it goes back to, you know, if I have to spend a couple of dollars over on a high-end player to get that player, I am willing to do that. But once we get to the mid-tier, I am extremely strict. And Ariel, you know this, like when we've played together before, I have no problem waiting out the auction until the point when the values do show up. And, you know, this happened in Tout Wars last year. I think we got to the first break and I had the most money left. Part of it was, you know, the players that I wanted just weren't being thrown out, and partially that was my fault. I probably should have just thrown out some of those players. But if there are no values and the players that I want are not out there, I am not going to overspend. So typically I'm very strict with, you know, the mid to low end guys. But again, I will be a little bit flexible in the draft if there is like inflation on higher end players or specific categories, as you mentioned.
That's the way to do it. Anything to add, Ruben?
Yeah, I tend to be more strict at top, but at the middle of the draft, when you're starting to see that there are big drops, like let's say you're a third base and you think that there's a drop after a certain after a certain spot, I think I'll be a little bit less strict on my prices, only because if I don't get that guy, my drop is going to be so much that I'm going to be kicking myself for the next 6 months that I didn't go that extra dollar to get this guy, because now I'm stuck with with the leftovers and the guys that I ended up that I really wanted that just, you know, missed it by $1 or $2.
Sorry, Ariel, just want to piggyback off that, is if you know where there's a big drop in a tier, right? If this year there's the big three starting pitchers, right? It's Skubal, Crochet, Skeens. If the last player in that tier, the last pitcher in that tier, whenever he gets thrown out last, everyone kind of knows that. And so that player might go for a little bit more money. And so that is something I think if you want one of those players, you might want to get them the first or second player thrown out in the tier rather than waiting until they're the clear last player and there's a huge drop-off.
Yes, absolutely. And it also works with nominations. If you really want one of those three players, a specific one, and you have a nomination, don't wait till the other guys are out there. Throw that guy out first, because if he's the third one out, you're going to have to pay more for him. So definitely very true. This is a question that comes up all the time, and people ask this. And I'm wondering what your take is, Frank. What do you use for the hitter-pitcher split in terms of percentage of your money for an auction?
So I think everybody's different, and I think that there are multiple ways to win. But what I usually wind up with is around 65% hitting, 35% pitching. But I am flexible with that, and there are different ways to do it. I mean, typically I don't look to go below 60% on hitting, and I don't look to go above 70% on hitting. So I'm somewhere in that 60 to 70% range. It usually winds up being 65% hitting, 35% pitching. I like to build more balance. So usually with the $260 set budget, I'll spend $160 to $170 on hitting and the rest on pitching.
Okay, so I've answered this before, but it's worth repeating. There's actually two questions here. The first question is, what do you want your value sheet to read? Right? Because when you set up your value sheet in terms of auction values, you can superimpose a percentage split. To me, that question is not the same as what should you actually spend. right? I want a certain optic on my sheet that may or may not be in line with what I'm actually going to spend. The question about what should your sheet read, it should be what the market is doing. If you're playing in the NFBC right now, the auctions are going about 63% towards hitting, 37% pitching. You should be setting your value sheets to be exactly that amount. Or maybe 1 or 2% tilted towards what you struggle in. If you're really good at hitting and you need a little more help pitching, maybe add another 1-2% to pitching, right? You can tilt it. But in general, you want to be by the market. And the reason for that is you want to be indifferent between a pitching bargain and a hitting bargain. For example, let's say, I don't know, the NFBC ridiculously wants to spend 90% of their money on hitting. I don't know. There's some crazy number. If you said, yeah, I'm going to go 65-35, the problem is that on your value sheet, it's going to look that all the pitching is going to be bargains and all the hittings are going to be overpays because everybody's spending all their money on hitting. So you want to at least be optically looking at, oh, okay, if everyone was doing 90-10, set your numbers 90-10 so that, optically it looks like a bargain. A hitter is just as good as a bargain a pitcher because you said that. What you actually should spend a little bit different, and I think it depends on the format. I personally, these days, in a 15-team mixed with the NFBC type format, I want to spend more on pitching than usual. I'm actually going about $100 on pitching because I think pitching dries up early. I think that I don't want to play waiver wire. I don't want to stream, so I want to get more value in the pitching. Plus, closers are going ridiculous right now, so I want a lockdown closer. I'm throwing more money into that. But I agree with you, Frank, though. You got to be somewhere between 60 and 70%. You don't want to veer too much off of that. Anything to add, Ruvain?
Yeah, I think you should also look at what you did last year and what worked and what didn't work. Because if you see, oh look, I put the same amount as everyone else did last year, same percentage, but I know pitching better and I figured it out better, so maybe I can put a little bit less here, and you can skimp a little bit on the pitching just because you feel like you know it a little better. Also, you have to be very careful with what you do, moving money around, because you don't want to, you can move money around to hitting to pitching. That's perfectly fine. There's no issue with that. But if you start looking at your team and you're saying, "Oh, wait a second, I moved so much money to pitching, and now I'm deficient in power," you can't do that. You have to keep, it's very fluid. The auction is very fluid. You have to make sure that you're not, hurting Peter to help Paul. That type of thing. You don't want to do that, and you have to have the balance. And each room, again, I keep saying this, but each auction is different. And just because what it's being done all over right now, as you said, 63-37, even though it's being done everywhere, your room may be 70-30, your room may be 60-40. You don't know what it's going to be, so you have to be prepared to to just roll with the punches.
Let's talk nomination strategies, because I think that what people don't realize is who you nominate is very important. And I know a lot of people say, in the beginning, I just throw out guys I don't want because I want to get money off the board. And I think that's a very bad mistake. What goes through your head, Frank, when you're making a nomination in terms of deciding who to nominate?
I know a lot of people like to use nominations to learn something about a room, and I think that it could be a good strategy, right? Throwing closers out early just to see what that market's going to look like. Throwing steals guys out early just to see what that market is going to look like. And I think that there is some credence to that. I like throwing out players early on who I know I don't want, and I know you just spoke about this, who are hype guys where when there's still a lot of money left, they could go for even more money than I think that they're supposed to. Let's just say, for example, Ben Rice. He's a huge hype guy this year, and people are spending a lot on him. Throw him out early. I know I don't want him. There's even more money left on the table right now, and so maybe he'll go for even more money than he already is, which is a lot of money. So I think that is something that could be useful, but typically I do a lot of the time throw out players that I don't want or players at positions I've already filled. I think that could be useful because, again, that you're not going to buy another first baseman or if you have two catchers filled, throw out a catcher because you're just not going to buy another catcher. And so you can get money off the board that way. But typically, guys that I know are being hyped up that I don't want, that I know are going to go for a lot of money, I do like to get those players off the board.
Let me dive into this a little bit more because I do want to flesh this out. And by the way, if you just bought a high-priced first baseman and, now, not that you're low, but other people have more money, by all means, you want to throw out the first baseman because you ain't buying him. there's also a smaller supply in the room. Economically, they're going to go higher than they probably should have because you've already you've already got a quantity in there. All right, so I agree with that one. But in terms of the hype players, so my question to you, Frank, to dive into this more is it better to throw those types of guys out higher, medium, higher in the draft, in the middle of the draft or the end of the draft? And I think it really depends on the type of player because there are hype guys at every stage, right? There's hype guys in the middle of the draft. Like, Chase Burns is a hype guy to me. He's in the middle of the draft. Is it better to throw Chase Burns out right away, or do you get more money off the board if it's sort of in the middle of the auction?
It is a good question, and I think every auction is different.
Well, we gotta pick one because the idea if you're gonna use a nomination to get money off the board with a hype guy, which is a great strategy, right? But I think it depends on the type of guy and where he's going in terms of where you should put him in, right? So I that's why I want to talk about this. If you want to get that extra dollar from Chase Burns, should you throw him out, where he would naturally go, or should you throw him out first round? You know what? What the hell, Chase Burns.
It probably does work better to throw him out later on, I would imagine, because I think a lot of people are probably waiting for that player to come out, and they're probably saving their money for that specific player if everyone likes that player. So I think that's the answer that you want to hear, but I have typically thrown those players out earlier just when there's more money on the board because I feel like there's a chance that they could go for even more than they should.
Okay. Ruvain, do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I think you should really throw out players where you can break up the tier, and not just high players, but players where you can break up a certain tier so you can cause inflation. Like, let's say you mentioned having a first baseman. If you have a first baseman, if you have one of the top 5 first basemen, you may want to throw out like let's say not the next top first baseman, but a first baseman 3 or 4 players down, because it'll create inflation for those first basemen that are between who you got and the guy below you. So you're actually going to create an imaginary imaginary inflation based on who you're nominating, and you can get more money off the board that way.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if you're going to use nominations to get money off the board, I want maximum damage for the room. So I agree with Ruvain on that kind of strategy, is that I want to, if you nominate, let's say there's, 5 first basemen, nominate number 3 or number 4, because then you shrink that tier from the inside out, and then you get into a situation of, okay, maybe the top guy won't go for more, but oh my goodness, that number 2 or 3 guy will. So it's not about always getting the most out of the money for the current turn that you're throwing out, but it's setting up for more extraction of value later on. It could be a hype guy. I'm trying to figure out, like what's the best thing. Trey Yesavage. When is he best to go in? Is it best when people are desperate for pitchers? Is it right away because he's a nice shiny new toy? It's not always clear to me when to throw those guys out. Like, I've even toyed with throwing guys later on. Like, I don't know, take a guy like Nolan Schunel. Okay, ATC has him as a $7 value, but he's going for an ADP of 1. I don't know. I don't really like having guys buy great bargains, so maybe I'll throw him out in the beginning for 1. Maybe he'll go for 3, and that's a way to get $2 out. Right? To me, $2 more is $2 more at any stage of the draft, and it's a question of when to throw guys so that you extract the most.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good point, too. Like, you see that often where you throw a $5 player out early on, and just because people have money, he winds up going for $8 or $9. But I don't think there's any way to really know that, right? It's just dependent on the room, and every room is different in that way. I mean, just because you threw that $5 player out in one draft and people have money and those people like him, he might go for 9. But if you throw him out in another draft early on and, you throw him out for $1, you might get him for $1, right? It's just like, that's where the variance from auction to auction, you just don't really know. And I don't know that there's like a clear answer to that question, right?
No,
It's
I don't know.
Like every room is different,
Yeah. No, I agree. Every room is different, and just because Trey Estevage goes, oh my God, because you threw him out at a certain point in one auction, it might not happen. But I still think we can try to noodle on, in general, what's the right tactic for the best long-term play. I don't know the answer. I'm truly asking and trying to get good ideas here.
You
'cause
should,
I
you
don't
should
know
also
the
look at
answer.
your values, because let's say you have a top first baseman and you see that a certain first baseman, I'm going to give an example, Luis Arias, he's always going as a big bargain. And if you have a first baseman or you have a corner and you don't have room for him, you don't want to put him in your util slot, you'd nominate him earlier, because if you don't nominate him, then someone's going to get that huge bargain later, and you want to try to just collapse the bargain for someone else. It's not just getting money off the board, but it's also collapsing the bargain for anyone else who you're playing against.
All right, so I got a question from one of our Twitter comments. Big Mike asks, can a Stars and Scrubs build work in a 15-team NFBC draft? Could 180 on 7 Stars and 80 on Scrubs be the way to do it? Well, as you said, Brett Sayer thinks so. What's your opinion, Frank, on Stars and Scrubs, and what type of league formats can it work? Do you often use it, or are you more spread the risk kind of guy?
Look, I think it's much more likely to work better the shallower the format that it is. I think in a 12-team mixed league, you can absolutely go Stars and Scrubs, just because the value of the players that are going at the end are just much better than the ones that you're going to get in a 15-team mixed, or, I mean, even dare say a mono league. Like, you just don't really want to have $1 or $2 players in a mono league. So I think it depends on you, the player. If you really are convicted on a lot of low-end players, it can work, right? Like, everybody is different. The way that my mind works is I feel like I need to have quality players up and down my roster, and even in a deeper format, right? So a 15-team auction in the NFBC where you're playing against really smart players and it's usually a pretty disciplined room. I would probably shy against something like that, just because I want to have quality up and down my roster. I don't want to have really like $1 to $3 players as my corner or my fifth outfielder, but that's just the way that I like to play. So I think it comes down to you, the player. Me, typically, I don't go Stars and Scrubs, but in a shallower format, I could see it working. Anything 15 teams or mono league or deeper, I personally would not do it.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. Ruvain?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to what you said, Ariel, earlier, that you want to try to accumulate a certain amount of value by the end of the draft. If you go Stars and Scrubs, you're not going to hit you mentioned the 310 number. You're not going to get anywhere close to that if you're doing Stars and Scrubs, because, yeah, you may get some value later on with a dollar player here, a dollar player there, but you're going to be overpaying or paying near value at the top players, which is perfectly fun. You could try that, but to me, it's almost like as if you're trying to quote-unquote punt a category. It's not punting a category, but you're punting the entire middle part of the draft, and that's where I think a lot of the drafts are won.
Yeah, one of the problems with Stars and Scrubs is that it takes you out of the running of being able to purchase players in the whole middle of the draft, right? You get to purchase plenty at the end, you purchase you guys at the top, but you can't afford guys in the middle. And to me, I think it's back to the purchasing power. You need to be able to afford players at every spot in the draft. Get a high price guy, get a middle guy. You want the best bargain at every point in the draft, and Stars and Scrubs very often will not allow you to be involved. So that's a reason against it. But I do agree with Frank that you in a shallow league, the $1 players are actually meaningful, and having 4 $1 players is actually very workable. In a mono league, no, you don't want more than one. In fact, I probably don't even want any $1 players in a mono league. Let's talk about bidding. All right, we know that Ariel Cohen at a live auction changes his cadence, bids very fast and very quickly, very quirky. I like to sort of play the room, play poker with the room, sort of do my hypnotizing and whatever I do. What does Frank Stampfl do in terms of bidding style at auctions?
First things first, for the star players, can we just keep things moving? Can we just get that out of the way, right? Because it kills me when these star players are thrown out for $5 and everyone's +1, $6 here, $7. Let's throw the player out at 20. Let's keep things moving, because, man, it just drives me crazy. Not that I want the auction to end, but it's like, all right, it's 4 hours. We're here for a while. So it's, let's keep things moving a little bit. When I'm in on a player, I like to let things breathe a little bit. I don't like to do these rapid back and forths on people. If things are slowing down, I do like to wait until going once, going twice, and then I bid. I'm kind of strategic with it, where I think it might play in psychologically, where if someone thinks that they're about to get a player and then you jump in at the last second, they kind of get deflated over it. Now, some people respond the other way and they say, oh, I'm not letting you get my player, and they're just going to bounce back in and automatically +1. But I really do like to kind of slow play things. I don't, as soon as someone throws out a number, I'm right back at it. I kind of like to let things breathe a little bit.
What do you do, Ruvain?
Well, I've actually never done a live auction by myself. Usually I'm with you, Ariel, and usually you're the one doing the bidding. Except this year, we are doing an auction against each other. We'll see how that works. But when it comes to an online auction, and I've done this against Ariel, we played against each other online. Online, I want to be aggressive. I don't want to wait for that 3-2-1. If I want a player, I'm just gonna keep bidding. Someone goes one, I'll go another one right away. I'm not gonna give any time for the other player to think. I'm just gonna put the number out there and see how the chips fall. I think for me that works best. As online. In person, I think you do have to wait a little bit just because you can look around the room. This is where, again, the poker table. Look who's bidding. How are they bidding? Are they looking at their numbers? Are they looking at the auctioneer? Are they looking at other players? What are they doing? You're trying to get a tell on if whether or not they're just faking it, meaning they're just trying to get the price up, or whether they're actually in on the player.
I mean, I think the general thing is when you bid, you don't want people to know whether you actually want a player or not. And so you have two options. You can either appear random, as sometimes you go quick, sometimes you go slow, sometimes you wait till going once, going twice, sometimes you go fast. But the other way to do it is to just be consistent. Always bid fast, always bid really slow, always bid at the end. Either one works. I like being consistent because I know what my script is, and I'm not a good actor, so I just, do what I know. But either or. Again, the idea is not to make sure that people don't know whether you want a player or not, and which is why my next question is about starting bids. Question is, what do you use in terms of starting bids? Again, I don't want people to know if I want the guy, so you can use a random one, but I like to use the same one. For high-priced players, I'll start 18. For a mid player, I'll start 10. For a lower player, 4, and of course 1 or 2 at the end. But I'll keep it on a same number so that just people hear my monotone 18, 18, 18. And this way they're not thinking, oh, does he want a player or not? Because he just hears the 18 once again. What do you do, Frank?
I like throwing a player out for about half of what I think that they're worth. And again, this is part of me I want to keep things moving. I don't want to throw out a star player at $1 and, all right, 2, 3, 4. So if it's a $40 player, I'll typically start it at $20 to try and keep things moving. If it's a $20 player, I'll start it at 10 because I know that player, I could throw him out for 1. It drives me crazy when people like a $20 player, they see a $20 player going for $3, $4 and they say, oh man, I thought I was going to, slip that one through or something. Like, come on, man. That's not going to happen. So I typically like to start the nomination at about half of what I think a player is worth.
Ruvain, how often should you bid on a player?
All the time. All the time. You want everyone to think you're on the player. You're on every single player. It doesn't matter what. You want everyone to hear your voice over and over again. You want them to be either laughing at you or annoyed at you by the end of the draft. Because if you did that, that means that they were paying attention to you more than they were paying attention to what they were doing. You should bid on anybody, but you also have to bid accordingly. You have to make sure that you don't bid on a certain price on a certain player that you're not comfortable with. Just try to get a price up. You don't want to get quote unquote stuck with that player because this is a 6-month season. If you're stuck with a player you're not really interested in, and you have to live with this player, and there's no trading, let's say NFBC, no trading, then you're in trouble. But I mean, you have to make sure that everyone knows or thinks you're in on every single player because why not?
You agree, Frank?
Yeah, I think that's probably the prudent move, and it's probably something that I need to do more. I do try to work in bids every now and then on players that I know I'm not in on, just to kind of, again, put out that image. Am I in on this player? Am I not in on this player? Just to kind of get people thinking or, keep them on their toes, whatever it might be. But yeah, I do like to try and every now and then be in on, just bid on players that I know that I don't want, just to kind of create that image. But to the point that Ruvain was making, price enforcing and things like that, you do have to be really careful, right? If it's an elite player that's going to go for $40, yeah, I'll throw like a $25, $26, $30 player. But the closer it gets to what you think that player is worth, you really have to be careful because if it's not a player that you don't want to get stuck price enforcing that player.
Yeah, of course. You should never price and force if you're going to if you get stuck, then you can't handle the player. Never price and force. I tend to though price and force quite a bit, especially in live auctions. I look at somebody, I just know whether they're going to bid or not, and I'm like, yeah, they're going to go to 7. All right, 6. I find myself doing that so much. I mean, theoretically, you'll get more money off the board if you do price and force successfully. So theoretically, if you know how to do it well and you can read players well, it's worth it. Obviously, yes, don't do it if you can't be stuck with a player, but I tend to want to do it a lot.
Ariel likes to live dangerously.
Yeah.
And also, don't be that person to bid on a first baseman if your first base, corner, and util are filled, because there are people who do that. There are people who do that. There are people who bid on a third catcher. You have to be aware of all your surroundings. Yes, you're trying to price and force, but if you win someone that doesn't fit on your roster, this is what I'm talking about live, because when it's online, a lot of times the software won't let you do that. But I mean, when you're in person, don't be that person, please.
Yeah, I will say that once, I know Ruben and I were doing a home league together, and I don't know, I nominated a third catcher or something like that for like $1. I'm like, all right, I'll go for like $5. And nobody bought him, and we were stuck with 3 catchers. And after that, I said, never again. Just can never bid. If you have 2 catchers already and it's 2-catcher league, you just can't bid on any catcher. That's it. What about +2 bids? So let's say, it's going 15, 16. You want him for, obviously the low as possible. Do you sometimes, Frank, try the tactic of going, all right, 16, 18, thinking that, well, he's not going to want to jump all the way 3 to 19, but if I would have said just 17, maybe he'll get me on the 18. Do you use the +2 ever?
I do it rarely, and I think there are times when it can work. I like to do it more when you're getting closer to a round number, where if it's a player is valued at $30, look, I want to get as much value as I possibly can. But if the bidding is slowing down, it's just you and one other person back and forth, and he throws out a $28 bid, you just go right to 30. And I think sometimes when people hear that +2 bid and it's going to a round number like that, it almost makes them kind of take a step back a little bit more. So, and that's just with my experience. I'm not saying that happens in every single auction, but it's just when you get to closer to those round numbers, if it's a player you really want, I'm willing to +2 bid there. But to be honest, it's not something that I do very often.
It's funny. I've done a study, and people always used to say, oh, you want to bid on the 9s, because if you say 19, people are not going to want to go to 20. It's actually, I've done it, it's actually on the 0s. People don't want to go to the 1s. If you say 10, very often people won't say 11. Or if you say 20, people very often won't say 21. So if you're going to pick a number to +2 on, you're absolutely right, Frank. Go to that 0 round number. It actually is a thing.
But you also have to look at the rest of the room and how the bidding for that player was going. If the bidding was going like at 1, when each going up $1, then you all of a sudden you say 2, or let's say around 18, you say 20, there's a good chance that you may scare other people away, especially if you weren't doing any of the bidding up until then. But if the bidding is like jumping and like you see there's 3-4 people in it, that $2 bid, $2 max, add-on bid doesn't always win it. So you have to be aware of what's going on, and if other players have been doing it, so you're aware, oh wait, this person may jump me, so maybe let me get the jump on them.
So people have asked me, do +2 bids actually work? And my answer is that it sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. But I always feel better if I do that. Because if I say, 18, I'm going to go 20. Well, if the guy goes to 21, then I say, all right, well, I guess I wasn't winning the guy anyway, so at least I extracted another $1, right? Because if I said 19, he would have said 20, and then, well, he gets 20, doesn't say 21. But if I win it and I get 20, then I say, thank goodness I said 20, because I won him. And if I said 19, I don't know if I would have won him. So I always feel better when I do it, no matter what. Let's take a couple of mailbag questions. We've thank you everyone for submitting them. I'll do three of them or so. Nick asks, which metrics do you use to target guys? Should I try to dominate at 3-4 categories and hope the others come through, or should I have more of a balanced approach? What do you do, Frank? Are you looking to have a balanced approach in an auction, or are you just trying to dominate? I mean, this is really an auction or a snake draft question. You can do both of them, but in an auction, are you always looking to do balanced, or do you sometimes go for pinching categories and punting?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about Roto, I'm always trying to build as balanced of a roster as humanly possible. And obviously, if you play in the NFBC, if there's any type of overall component, you need to be as balanced as humanly possible. But in a home league, there are ways that you can punt a category in Roto and win, but it makes the margin so slim where you have to be top 3 or top 2 in basically every other category to pull that off. So I typically, and look, if this person's playing in a head-to-head categories league, like, yeah, you could punt categories on a weekly basis. That's fine. But if it's a Roto league, I am always trying to build out for balance.
All right, next question. Philip asks, when prepping, do you target a handful of guys with upside that you can get for cheap in the draft? And what is your strategy for getting those endgame players you want? Maybe it's nominating them halfway through the draft, or are you saving them for the very end? What do you do, Frank?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, as far as trying to get specific upside players, I don't know that I necessarily have to do that. I think it's more likely something I would do if I was trying to do a stars and scrubs approach where you need some of those $1, $2, $3 players to kind of hit and provide excess value. So maybe it's something I would try to focus on more if I were doing stars and scrubs. Typically with the upside guys, I might try to wait until maybe I have that so-called hammer, right, when I have more money than everyone else. And it depends on when that is throughout the auction, right? I mean, if that point is earlier on, then maybe I'll throw out an upside guy that I think I can get because I have that so-called hammer. I have more money than other people. And I know this is something that you like to talk about a lot, Ariel, is hot and cold rooms, right? When the room is a little bit colder and you can see that maybe people are starting to slow down on the bidding and, some of that inflation is coming down, maybe that's when you want to throw out an upside guy or a player that you really like just because, the room isn't as hot as it was before and some of the spending has come down. So I would just really feel the room out on when to throw out a player I want or even an upside player if that's who I want.
That's a great point. Anything to add, Ruben?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. The only thing I will add is that if you're in an auction and it's a keeper league, you do want to keep some money around because other people looking at these upside guys is not only for this year but for next year. So make sure you know the rules and how much money you get to keep players by. Because if you're in an auction and the keeper and you have to get a certain amount, I know me and you are we've been in leagues where a keeper league where someone will have no money left or like and they lose out on the guy, or they'll have too much money left and they'll say, okay, instead of bidding $1 on a guy where no one else can spend, all of a sudden they'll say $8 because they have $8 left, and then the keeper value is like deflated just because of the fact that you paid too much at the auction.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking more in the redraft type format for auction, but if you're in a keeper auction where prices, keep next year or, go up, escalate a little bit next year, you don't always want to go for that. I know I was drafting in the XFL this year, and I don't know, I was targeting Harry Ford, but for like $1 or $2 or $3, and I don't know, he went for like $8, and I'm saying to myself, I mean, there goes his keeper value. I mean, I don't want him next year for 13. So, you got to be really cognizant of that. And finally, a question from CJ. He says, in only leagues, do you ever focus on going for top guys at shallow positions to avoid the higher probability of needing the waiver wire? I mean, in general, if you spend very high in mono leagues, you're going to be forced to get the $1 guys at the bottom, and those guys are probably going to be playing the waiver wire, or those guys get partial playing time. I think in general, my answer is no. I think in mono leagues, I don't go for top guys. I go for middle guys where I can. I don't know. Any better answer, Frank?
I could see putting more of an emphasis on specific positions, not necessarily on the higher end, but like we spoke about where you see teardrops throughout the auction where you just don't want to be left behind. You want to have a solid starter across the board. So I could see, for example, this year second or third base is not as great. Trying to make sure that you get a solid starter there. I don't necessarily think you need to go all the way up to the high end, but if you see a position where things just really kind of fall off the face of the earth, I could see maybe putting more of an emphasis on getting one of the top 7 guys. It doesn't necessarily have to be the top guy, but getting one of those guys before the value falls off.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good way to phrase it.
And I would add, you're not inventing the wheel here. You're not the only person thinking about that. So if you're thinking about going to top guy, and it's a 15 team league, I'm sure at least 5 other guys are thinking about that, and you're going to lose all value in that, and you're better off going with the lower guy because you're not going to be able to afford other players.
Well, guys, is there anything else we missed talking about on auctions that we think it's important to tell the listeners?
I don't know,
Have
man.
fun.
I think we covered it all.
Have
Have
fun.
fun. Get the players you
Enjoy.
want. Get your guys at the right
Yes.
cost, of course.
Yes,
Yes.
this is the best time of year. You get to, especially if it's in person, there's camaraderie. Enjoy it. Make sure you draft players that you're comfortable with, even if they're overpriced, underpriced. Just because, like I mentioned, it's a 6-month year in most cases. You're going to be living and dying with these guys. If you're not following every day, you're following weekly, and you're going to be very disappointed if you don't like the guys on your team. You're going to be ecstatic if you love the guys on your team, and you'll follow it more, and you'll have more invested in it, so to say.
And I can't imagine many people listening to this specific episode aren't playing in auctions, but for some reason, if that's the case for anybody, please go try the auction because it is the best way to play any type of fantasy sport, in my opinion. You have the ability to get any player you want. You can't get every player you want, but it opens up a whole new world of strategy where in a snake draft, you're kind of just beholden to where you are drafting in the draft. But auction, everything is possible, and you can get any single player you want. So it's just really, really interesting from a strategy perspective if you've never played it before.
Definitely take a look. RT Sports has auctions, Fantrax has auctions, NFBC has auctions, and all of them have stuff at either $150 or less of a price point. Try it once. Do it with a partner. You never know, and you might enjoy it. And, of course, if you are in an auction with me and I bid, please just drop out. Thank you.
I will
That's a
not
joke.
do that. Thank you.
Okay. All right. This has really been a fantastic show. So glad that you joined the show, Frank. And, we purposely did the auction episode as our 200th celebratory episode because it's really our favorite. By the way, Frank, do you know who was on the 100th episode of our show?
Was it Ian Khan?
It was not Ian Khan.
Was it me?
No, I'll give you a hint. He's a Major League Baseball player.
Oh, I think you told me this before. Was it
Yes.
Vinny Pasquantino?
Vinny Pasquantino.
Yes.
Let's
number
go.
100.
Yes.
Ruvain, do you remember who our very first episode was with?
Yes, I'm 99% sure I remember because he did the episode from a ballpark.
Yeah.
I believe it was Eno Saris.
Eno Saris did it, and he was literally like watching a game somewhere in Arizona or something at the same
Yes.
time, and you could hear like the balls, and he's like, "Oh wow, look at that shot!" It was very fun.
Yes, I remember that.
All right, well, anyways, thank you so much, Frank. Why don't you just before we go, why don't you just tell us where we can find your stuff, read you, and listen to you? Because by the way, why don't you just tell the audience first, and I'll comment.
Yeah, so you can follow me on X, Twitter, at Roto_Frank. We've got so many podcasts coming out right now. Fantasy Baseball Today is where you can listen. We are daily, basically, from now and until the end of the season. We put out some shorter content as well. These FBT Express episodes, you can listen on audio podcasts. You can watch on YouTube. And it's a busy time. We've got like live mock drafts coming up. Position previews are happening right now. We have a mock draft mega stream that we're doing a couple of weeks from now. So if you subscribe to the podcast, you'll learn all about it and you'll be able to, consume all the content.
And I'll tell you that Frank is really the best host in the whole industry because, well, listen, we do a weekly show, okay? Frank does every single day. We're talking 5 days a week, and it's not just one podcast. You're actually putting out 2 because you're putting out the Express podcast, which, by the way, I listen to both. They're great,
Appreciate that.
But I will tell you this because I've been on your show. The amount of work that Frank puts in for each episode is tremendous. I mean, he has I put out a rundown for my show. His rundown is like 3 times as long for his daily show, and he's got specific stats in there. He does deep dives. I can tell you that it is a fantastic show, and Frank is absolutely fantastic as the host. So if you haven't checked it out, I mean, I got into this from listening to the original CBS shows way, 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 way back. But you've really taken the reins, and you do such a great job. So fantastic work, Frank.
I really do appreciate that, man. It means a lot. And I actually started listening to that podcast as well. So you can imagine for me how surreal it was, back in college, listening to Adam Azer and Nando DeFino, Al Melchior, Scott White. Obviously, Scott's still on the show as well. And, Chris Towers came along as well and joined the podcast. And then I took over for Adam, which, again, is like surreal to me because to me, he's like the GOAT host of all time. Like, I think he's one of the best to do it. So it really is surreal for me to take over that. And I really do appreciate the kind words and appreciate you guys having me on, man. 200th episode, that is a great accomplishment. So keep doing your things, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. All right, Ruben, what about you? Where can we see your stuff?
You can follow me on Twitter X at MLB Injury Guru, where I'm tweeting out injury updates as they come, as players are coming back into the fold, as players start to warm up and then warm down or being held back, whatever it may be. You can also catch all my writing over at Rotoballer.
And I'm Ariel Cohen, Twitter X at ATCNY. I'm on Fangraphs, Rotographs, at Rotoballer, ATC Projections, all over the place. And of course on the Beat the Shift podcast every week, but if you're listening to that, so you know that. And again, I apologize for my raspy voice. I tried the best to go through it. I've literally had this voice for like 3 weeks now, and we're not going to stop the show in the heart of draft season for my raspy voice. So thank you, and I appreciate you guys listening, even though, and hopefully I'll get better real soon. Anyways, thank you so much once again to Frank Stampfl for coming on the show, and from all of us here at Beat the Shift. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.